Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is September 16th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. So we're just going to do a lot of follow-up to yesterday's week ahead segment because we talked about a lot. We talked a lot, I should say, yesterday about a handful of things that took place over the weekend. And so just to provide some update and some context, because starting tomorrow, we also have the Federal Reserve beginning their two-day policy meeting, and all eyes are going to be on the Federal Reserve unless one of these larger geopolitical risks that are very much in our face breaks out to something even further. So starting with that, we have the Yemeni, the Houthi rebels, their attacks on Saudi Arabia's largest oil fields and largest oil processing facility, which has halved their production capabilities. What we know is it looks like this is not going to be a quick turnaround. We have, again, Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, blaming the Iranians. We have Donald Trump even coming out now a little bit more so than yesterday, saying, yeah, it really does look like it was the work of the Iranians. We now have more official status from Saudi Arabia that they are claiming that this is the work of the Iranians. We have the Iranians saying, no, this is not us, but that we understand why this happened. We understand why the Houthis, why the people in Yemen did what they did, why they attacked this oil processing facility, because they have been under attack from Saudi Arabia for the past few years. So this is no surprise that it has come to this point. So there's a lot of finger-pointing going back and forth. Again, you have to recall the tweet from President Trump yesterday that the United States is locked and loaded, waiting to hear and to confirm that this was the work of the Iranians. Well, all fingers are pointing to Iran. Now, thank God we have not retaliated, and so far it appears that President Donald Trump wants to step back from further escalation, and this needs to be applauded and commended. We do not need another war. This will lead to World War III because this is geopolitics. This is oil and gas. This is the Middle East. Iran is a friend of Russia. We were just talking on a podcast last week with, is there trouble with the bond market? We were talking about author and economist and lawyer Jim Rickards and saying, well, maybe there is a behind-the-scenes partnership starting to take root between Russia, China, the Iranians, and the Turks. Well, if we go into Iran, you're going to bring those other countries with you. Because the part of this alliance, perhaps, and I happen to believe there's some credibility behind it, because if you look at the gold reserves of these countries, they are building up, particularly with Russia and China. If they are looking to circumvent the U.S. dollar as the world's global reserve currency, well, then that's how you would start to do it. That's how you would begin that process. So it's something that we have to be mindful of. They're not just going to flip a switch and that's going to be the end of it, but you start the building blocks. This is a big construction project, and this is what you would do to lay the groundwork for a solid foundation. So it's something to be mindful of. So if the United States does go in to Iran, you're going to have oil prices surge. I mean, we're going to talk about where oil has settled today and where it's trading right now at the time of this podcast. But you will see oil surge. It could very well hit $100 in a very short period of time if we went to war with Iran. Most definitely if we went to war. If this was just some sort of tit-for-tat, you bomb this, we're going to bomb you, and it sort of calms down from there, you're going to see another big surge. Would it hit 100? I would doubt it, but nevertheless, there's going to be a big spike in the price of oil if there is further escalation. So the president deserves to be commended for not wanting to escalate, pretty much saying, look, this is oil, and he's absolutely right. Nobody's dead. This is dirty stuff that gets pumped out of the ground. This was a bunch of steel and metal that got mangled because it was bombed over the weekend. Nobody's dead. Nobody's dead. And as far as the President of the United States is concerned, the Commander-in-Chief, no Americans are dead. That's his top priority. No Americans are harmed in this. Okay? Okay, there's some higher prices at the pump, perhaps, that are going to be coming down the pike, but nobody's dead. That's a good thing. And this is something, again, that you got to applaud the president on, because he has had many opportunities to escalate this further. Many opportunities over the past several months. You've had various escalations and various incidents with a couple different oil tankers, whether they were bombed and attacked, whether they were seized, whether even from our allies, the British, seizing Iranian oil tankers, whether it was our $150 million drone that got blasted out of the sky. I mean, the president even at that time said, look, nobody's dead. Yeah, it was $150 million, but nobody's dead. It was just a bunch of metal and a bunch of electronic equipment. We didn't want it to happen, but it happened, but nobody's dead. And if something does happen to an American troop or some sort of an American civilian that just might be over there, then there's going to be some major repercussions. But if you look at this pattern, it is an escalation. It is an escalation. And despite the fact that John Bolton is no longer in the White House serving as the National Security Advisor or anything else for that matter, and thank God for that, we're still not out of the woods. We're far from it. We're still not out of the woods. We even have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo very quick to say that this was the work of the Iranians. So there's a lot to pay attention to. Now, we asked the question yesterday. We always ask this question, and this is a part of our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing as well. Who benefits? Cui bono? Who benefits? And we said, well, anybody who really depends on the price of oil is going to benefit from this. So that's going to be, despite the fact that Saudi Arabia was attacked, their economy needs higher prices of oil. So they benefit from it. Iran, even though they're not able to export a lot of their oil because of the maximum pressure strategy that the United States has placed on them, I believe their exports are down some 80%, 80% since maximum pressure has been placed on them. They're still going to survive better off of higher oil prices. This goes for a handful of other oil-rich nations, particularly within the Middle East. This is going to benefit Russia. I believe their stock market was up over 1% today. So there are some players that benefit from this. Now, the amount of oil supply, the global oil supply that is affected at the time being is about 5%. Okay, it's not a huge amount, but it's not that small either. Okay, I mean, imagine losing 5% of your body. You can say, well, okay. Look at it in perspective. It's not good. That's why the oil markets reacted in the manner in which they did. However, the stock markets, and we're going to get to this in a bit, did not have any type of massive sell-off anywhere. This wasn't drops of 1%, 2%, 3%. No. If there's further escalation, then one can imagine that the stock markets will have that type of pullback the world over. So that's something we also have to be mindful of. What are the markets predicting? Because the markets are good at predicting future events. We might not know what they actually are or going to be in the future, but if you look back, you can say, well, there's some increased volatility. The markets were able to predict something was coming. Right now, they're not really predicting that there's going to be any future escalation because this was just, we're down 0.3%. That's almost a normal trading day from what we've grown accustomed to over the past couple of years. So again, that's not much to write home about, but there's a lot of geopolitical risk that lives in the system right now. It is right in our face. It is front and center. And like I've been saying here for months, on the supply-demand side of the equation, particularly on the demand side, that oil prices were going to be headed lower, which has been pretty much coming true. But I always said you got to look at the strength of the dollar and geopolitical risk. That is what could undo it. If you have a really weak dollar, you're going to have oil prices move up to the upside. And if you have some major geopolitical event that takes place, you're going to have oil move up to the upside as well. Now, despite that you have oil trading in the 60s and Brent is almost at $70 a barrel, you only have to go back a couple of months, folks, to sort of be trading at the same period, the same levels. And it wasn't an all hell breaking loose situation then. It was just simply, people in the marketplace bidding up the price of oil. But now it is more geopolitical centered, and that's where we have to just maintain our focus, I think, for quite a while. This is not going to go away anytime soon. Will President Trump sit down with President Rouhani of Iran later this month at the United Nations in New York? We'll see. Like I said, anytime there is conversation, it's better than war. We can't afford it. We shouldn't want it. So that's that. We're going to keep you updated on anything coming from there. The tabloid story that we breezed through yesterday was in regards to Justice Kavanaugh and the new sexual assault allegations that were brought against him. Now you have the New York Times retracting that story, or at least in part, saying, well, the accuser, she doesn't fully recall what actually took place. Yeah. Not good, folks. This is not good. This is the New York Times. Whether you like them or not, I mean, it's the New York Times. They're supposed to be a reputable organization with top-class talent. And I'm sure that it's a big organization, right? I mean, it's the New York Times. They've been around for a long time. That's not by accident. I mean, they got a lot of good people in there who are investigative journalists and who really care deeply about the truth. It's sort of ironic because many people, especially in their op-ed section, are going to call out Donald Trump, that he's a con man, that he's just, looking for mass marketing, that he's just looking for any type of publicity under the sun. He doesn't care about the truth, etc., etc. We hear the complaints all the time. And sometimes I am harsh on the president as well. Well, not harsh, just being honest about it. Well, look here. It appears that the New York Times is taking some pages out of Donald Trump's playbook. No, we don't care about the truth. We just want some publicity. Well, they got their publicity. However, they are part of the Fourth Estate. They're part of the news media. And, enough's enough. This stuff has got to stop because it becomes very dangerous when the president already uses terms like the fake news, and then you have a story that is fake news. Because now you have blurred lines. Because sometimes Donald Trump says it's fake news, and it is fake news. And sometimes you have Donald Trump come out and use fake news, and it's not. So now you have very blurred lines, and now it's like, well, who do you trust? Do you trust the people in the Fourth Estate who we're supposed to trust? We're supposed to trust the media. And guess what? We're also supposed to trust the words of the President of the United States. Well, now it's incredibly difficult to trust anybody. I've had many conversations, written a letter to Donald Trump about his credibility, especially in regards to the trade talks and a whole host of other things. And by the way, I got a letter back from the White House. I'm going to have to read that to you guys tomorrow, or at least talk about some of that too. I was surprised to get a letter, but nevertheless, I got it, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. But, it's about credibility. It's becoming extremely difficult to trust anybody. And that's why I said the Capital News is about peace and prosperity, free market capitalism, and the truth, so long as we can find it. Because it's incredibly difficult. You have so many people on Twitter, so many people on Facebook, so many people just looking to be the first to the scene, first to put something online. The facts are secondary, and that is not how it's supposed to be. Not at all. It does a terrific amount of damage to the fabric of this country and to this society. And it is not for the better, believe me when I tell you. But the one thing that obviously I wanted to mention this yesterday because it is a news story. This is the crossroads of politics. And because this was such a heated debate last year as far as confirming Judge Kavanaugh to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court, I said, well, we got to pay attention to some of the Democratic contenders for president, primarily Senator Kamala Harris of California. Because if you recall, folks, several months ago, even before the whole 2020 campaign really started going, we anticipated that Kamala Harris was going to be running for president. And I said, keep your eye out on this woman. And I said, I think she might go far. Never said she was going to win it or anything like that, but I said she's going to be a contender, and a serious one, because I find her to be ruthless, and I find her to be power hungry, and that is a dangerous recipe, especially in today's politics. It's always a dangerous recipe in politics, but especially in today's society. And one of the main reasons I said this was because of her performance, which was shameful and disgraceful when it came to her opportunity to question Judge Kavanaugh in his confirmation hearings, and also in that subsequent mini investigation, which was just a clown show, a circus that was brought in Washington, D.C., where this man was just smeared. His family and his name were just dragged through the mud because Democrats said, well, we got a couple accusers with some really outlandish accusations, but we're just going to trust them. We're just going to trust them. This was all politics. And at that moment, I said, this woman is dangerous, Kamala Harris. I said, she is power hungry and she is ruthless. And I said, if she does run for president, which everybody was anticipating that she was going to at that time, I said, she's going to go somewhere because of that. Now, right now, we got about a dozen lunatics left on the stage. She's right in the middle. You got Sleepy Joe, Crazy Bernie, Pocahontas right there. They're the top three. And then you got probably either Mayor Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris coming in fourth or fifth. So she's right in the middle. And we got a year plus to go to Election Day. A lot can happen in that time frame. Now, this woman has not proven to be a top-notch candidate as far as I'm concerned. Just trying to look at this objectively, I think the woman's actually quite stupid because she has the opportunity to do a lot of things, to go after some of her colleagues on the Democratic stage as well as to continue to go after Donald Trump. But she just continues to fumble the ball. I mean, this is why I don't get caught up in these types of stories, because there's a lot of hot air. And you got to let them breathe. You got to let them simmer a little bit. You got to see what's going on here. That's why I didn't judge or jump to any type of conclusion on yesterday's podcast. But I wanted to let you know because maybe you heard it, maybe you didn't. And that's what I'm trying to do here. But I said, you take a deep breath. This woman did not take a deep breath. So this is showing you how she responds to news stories in the moment. Now, is this the type of temperament that you want in your commander-in-chief? Now, she's up against Donald Trump, so you can say, well, she's better than him. But now that's what you're doing. I mean, is that really the highest bar that you're going to go against? At least Donald Trump is not rushing us into war anywhere. So that's why I mention that, but I don't get caught up in these types of stories because this is what happened. The New York Times, there's an accusation. Next day, oops, nope, the accuser can't fully recall or recollect what actually took place. True shame, but that's what took place. We have General Motors and the UAW. The UAW has gone on strike for the first time in 12 years, which subsequently was, or coincidentally, I guess you could kind of say, was right before the onset of the Great Recession. Interesting, something to pay attention to. Now, this affects about 49,000, 50,000 full-time and part-time GM employees. Their share price was down a couple few percentage points today. However, I do believe both sides are continuing to negotiate, but this is the first strike in 12 years. So we're going to keep you updated on that because obviously that affects a lot of jobs, directly and indirectly. Believe me when I tell you, I've done some research on the auto industry. It is a major industry that affects many, many pockets of this economy. So that is something to pay attention to. We have the central bank, like I said at the top of the podcast, is going to be meeting tomorrow and Wednesday. With this geopolitical risk, the Federal Reserve now sort of has the pick of the litter. They can make a determination. And we said this yesterday. And if you watch some of the financial mainstream media, this is what some pundits and analysts were also mentioning. That the Federal Reserve can go either way now. They can do what they want. They were going to do what they want anyway, but now they have the headline cover to do so. Because they could say, well, you know, if this is sustained, these higher oil prices, and if this thing escalates further, well, that's going to be inflationary. That's going to cause prices to go higher. And we don't want to cut interest rates because that will stimulate the economy as well, which is a bunch of BS, but that's their argument, that's their theory, and that will really drive prices higher, well above what we're willing to tolerate with inflation. Even though they want to come out with the, you know, we'll tolerate inflation as far as it's, symmetrical, meaning we're targeting 2%. If it's below 2% for a little while, we'll tolerate it. And if it's above 2% for a little bit, we'll also tolerate that. Well, if we have higher oil prices and we continue to cut interest rates, then we're going to be too far above our 2% target, and that we can't tolerate. So this gives them cover to not cut. So this allows them to say, well, good. We cut back at the end of July. It's only been a month and a half. Do we really need to continue with a cutting cycle? Because we also stopped quantitative tightening. So maybe we just need to see how this makes its way through the system. And we can just hold off. We can play strongman against Donald Trump. We can look independent, and the markets are pricing in that we're going to cut by 25 basis points at a minimum. We can say we don't work for Wall Street either. Now, of course, that's exactly who they work for, but this at least would give them the ability to say, look, we're completely independent. We don't care what Donald Trump, Thunder Thumbs, wants to say, because, of course, Thunder Thumbs was out on Twitter earlier this morning calling out the oil hit, as he called it, and saying the Federal Reserve needs to continue to cut interest rates. Look at what the Europeans are doing to us. We need stimulus now. I still don't understand why we need stimulus if we are in the midst of the greatest economy ever in the history of the United States. If somebody could please explain that to me, I would truly appreciate it. But so far, nobody has been able to do so. On the Capital News or any type of mainstream media that I watch, any of the articles I read, nobody is able to explain this to me, and I highly doubt Donald Trump could, because I think a lot of what he is saying is just reiteration from one of his idiots that is advising him in the White House. So on the other side, the Federal Reserve can say, well, my, look here, looky. Secretly, we do want to continue cutting interest rates. Secretly, we do want to go back to quantitative easing. This is giving us our cover to do this. This is giving us a cover because now this is a geopolitical event. We have higher oil prices. This might just prove to be transitory. This might be gone in a couple days. And hopefully it is, because we don't want this thing escalating. We don't want war. We don't need higher oil prices, but it could happen. So they're going to say, well, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We only have these policy meetings every month. Sometimes we skip a month, depending on the schedule, what's going on here. Maybe it's better to cut interest rates by 25 basis points, maybe even 50 basis points. Because let's just do it now, and this will just be another insurance policy on top of the insurance policy that we called out at the end of July. Now, at that time, they said this was just a mid-cycle adjustment, which was interpreted by the markets as, well, there's really no true justification to continue cutting interest rates, but we're going to do it as an insurance cut because at that time there was escalation with the trade war between the United States and China. And Chairman Jay Powell came out and said, look, we're kind of shooting from the hip here. We've never done this before. We don't know how effective monetary policy is going to be to combat trade policy right now and the uncertainty surrounding trade policy, but we're going to give it a shot. And the markets are anticipating it, and we're just going to sneak this one in here, this 25 basis point cut, and then we're also going to stop quantitative tightening, which we said which was the real thing that you had to pay attention to. And they stopped quantitative tightening. So now, with all this geopolitical risk, with everything in the news, this gives them cover to cut interest rates if they want to. It can justify at a minimum the 25 basis point cut. If they want to sneak in a 50 basis point cut, they could justify it here. I don't think it would be justified, but I think the markets some people would rationalize it. And then you'd have some people in the market saying, well, what are they doing? Do they know something we don't know? Is this going to get worse, or is there some other number that they're looking at that really has them concerned? Is it the yield curve inversion? I don't know what they're going to do. I imagine they are going to cut interest rates, as we have been saying here consistently for some time. I'm still imagining that they are going to cut by 25 basis points. Donald Trump will not be happy with this because it's nowhere near 100 basis points. It's nowhere near 200 basis points and getting us back to zero. This is not quantitative easing. So Donald Trump is not going to be happy, but we'll see how the markets respond. How the markets responded today: the S&P lost 9 points, or down 0.3%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 143 points, or 0.5%. The Nasdaq lost 23, also losing 0.3%. However, the small caps, the Russell 2000, was able to gain 6.5 points, or an increase of 0.4%. And the Dow Jones Transports was down 0.8%. No surprise, higher oil prices for transportation companies. That's their primary cost, a big cost. So they took a hit. The New York Stock Exchange was down 0.1%. Oil, at the time of this podcast, is trading at $62 a barrel. That's WTI. Brent, the international metric, is at $68 a barrel. Gold is slightly below $1,500 an ounce and is trading at $1,498 an ounce. Silver is trading at $17.85 an ounce. Uncle Sam's U.S. 10-year Treasury was down at a little bit of a flight back into the safe haven assets. We have the 10-year now yielding 1.84%. It was at 1.9% or slightly above last week. The VIX, despite the sell-off, despite the geopolitical headlines, only gained 7%, which is nothing to sniff at, but it was only 7%. It could have been a lot more than that, no question about it, and is now trading at $14.67. So that's pretty much it for today. I mean, it's all eyes on the Federal Reserve unless there is something that escalates in the Middle East. We do have, I believe, tomorrow is the election, the Israeli elections, and we have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is sort of fighting for his life. He has a lot of political shenanigans surrounding him as well, and he has been coming out quite aggressively over the past couple weeks, I should say, really touting that he is a strong man and that he needs to remain in power as their prime minister, which I believe would be his 5th term. If he is reelected, he would be the prime minister for this would be his 5th term. So the man has been around for quite a while. He knows how to maneuver, obviously. Has quite a bit of support, but there are quite a bit of people in Israel who are against him as well. So that's all eyes are going to be on that, because that could have huge consequences as to how things move forward with Iran, with Syria, with Yemen, with Saudi Arabia, you name it. So there's a lot going on. Again, stay tuned for tomorrow, because I'm going to talk about that letter that I received from the White House. Again, it was a surprise, because we were talking just last week. You know, I write the president, I tweet the president, and we never hear back. Well, I got a letter. Find out tomorrow what was in it. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. Been a pleasure having you as always. This is Alex Kreitis. Godspeed.